We wanted to start off this morning just really quickly. Normally when we talk to groups, we really like the interaction back and forth. And of course, this forum is not conducive for that. And so we tried to think of a way to have a conversation with you guys about what we've been talking about the last couple of days. And what we came up with is a Facebook page. So if you don't have a Facebook page, if you've never been on Facebook, now's the time. Even I did it 2 weeks ago, got my own Facebook page. But we've put a lot of the slides that we've used. We've seen people taking some notes, and some people have asked us for slides. So we put a lot of slides on Facebook. Please feel free. Use them however you can use them in your ministry. Anything you can do with them that helps you get done what you're trying to do, please feel free to use them. Mainly, though, we really want to have a conversation with you. So we put on Facebook at Church Transformation, facebook.com/Church Transformation. We put some questions that relate to the material that we've been talking about, and we hope you'll just go on and kind of join that conversation with us. And over time, we'll just keep talking about things and see where we end up. So facebook.com/Church Transformation will get you to the conversation we hope to get going. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, let me try that again. Good morning.
Good morning.
This is the day the Lord has made.
Let us rejoice and be glad in it.
Well, we're continuing our understanding of what it means to lead by following Jesus. And so as we do that, we want to just briefly review just where we find ourselves over the past few days, since yesterday morning.
The past few months since
Yes.
yesterday.
And first of all, we just want to review our understanding of transformation. It is a movement of hope into a future that is different from the past. Now, there are transformational leaders. We talked about particularly Christian transformational leaders and the three disciplines of Christian transformational leaders. And the first two disciplines we've talked about have been faithful remembering, which we identified with the symbol of a boat, and we talked about leaving our boats behind. And we considered that what faithful remembering is about is not about, while it's faithful remembering the past, the direction is not the past. The direction of faithful remembering is the future. And we focused on the disciples' transformational response to a future hope of being fishers of people by a present response of leaving their boats behind and following Jesus. And then we talked about faithful equipping, about relationship and task being aligned so that we help to equip followers of Jesus to be in relationship with Jesus. Just as importantly, so that we can equip followers of Jesus to be in relationship with the world through Jesus. And the symbol that we used there was water, overflowing water. Remember, Jesus says, "Let those who are thirsty come to me and drink. Out of their hearts shall flow living water." Today, we're going to begin talking about faithful encouraging. And particularly the symbol before us is right up here, is the cross. And what it means to live in faithful encouragement of the cross.
The discipline of faithful encouraging addresses the need for courage because transformation comes with change. Christian transformational leaders speak the language of change through the ways they are willing to change themselves. They embrace leadership roles that are different from the past and forward-looking. They encourage followers to become leaders in a movement of hope. Now, let's look at a way followers are actually a unique style of leader. If you look at the screens.
If you've learned a lot about leadership and making a movement, then let's watch a movement happen start to finish in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons. First, of course, a leader needs the guts to stand alone and look ridiculous. But what he's doing is so simple, it's almost instructional. This is key. You must be easy to follow. Now here comes the first follower with a crucial role. he publicly shows everyone else how to follow. Notice how the leader embraces him as an equal. So it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Notice how he's calling to his friends to join in. See, it takes guts to be a first follower. You stand out and you brave ridicule yourself. Being a first follower is an underappreciated form of leadership. The first follower transforms a lone nut into a leader. If the leader is the flint, the first follower is the spark that really makes the fire. Now here's the second follower. This is a turning point. It's proof the first has done well. Now it's not a lone nut and it's not two nuts. 3 is a crowd and a crowd is news. A movement must be public. Make sure outsiders see more than just the leader. Everyone needs to see the followers because new followers emulate followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, then 3 more immediately. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point, and now we have a movement. As more people jump in, it's no longer risky. If they were on the fence before, there's no reason not to join in now. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, and they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. And over the next minute, you'll see the rest who prefer to stay part of the crowd, because eventually they'd be ridiculed for not joining. And ladies and gentlemen, that is how a movement is made. So let's recap what we've learned. If you are a version of the shirtless dancing guy, all alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals, making everything clearly about the movement, not you. Be public, be easy to follow. But the biggest lesson here, did you catch it? Leadership is over-glorified. Yes, it started with the shirtless guy, and he'll get all the credit, but you saw what really happened. It was the first follower that transformed a lone nut into a leader. There's no movement without the first follower. See, we're told that we all need to be leaders, but that would be really ineffective. The best way to make a movement, if you really care, is to courageously follow and show others how to follow. When you find a lone nut doing something great, have the guts to be the first person to stand up and join in.
Yes, you'll be able to find the link to that for use at your church on Facebook.com. Did you have any idea that being in leadership could be so much fun, or being a follower could be so much fun? The reason we did this is because some of you have probably been thinking, we're just not leaders. I'm not a leader. I'm a follower. As this video vividly shows, we can all be leaders by simply being a first follower. It is the leadership of the first followers that provided the stimulus, the momentum to begin the movement that you saw on the screens. First followers are indeed a unique style of leader. The discipline of faithful encouraging, which we're speaking about today, embraces chaos and has 3 basic elements. The first one is the discipline of faithful encouragement is living in the understanding that change is required if the future is going to be different than the past. Second, transformational leaders understand that they cannot encourage others to change if they're not willing to change and to model the vulnerability of a shared ministry. They also understand that transformational change in an organization will occur only if persons within the organization are willing to change. And faithful encouragers realize that transformational change is chaotic change. But they also realize that creative possibility resides in the chaos. And it's by embracing the chaos that they're able to correctly interpret current reality by the vision of a reality that is beyond the present. The scripture for understanding faithful encouraging is Jesus' second invitation to discipleship, and you find that in Mark 8. He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. A powerful scripture. To fully appreciate the power of Jesus' second invitation to discipleship, it's important to understand the context in which Jesus found himself as he led his followers into a future that was different than the past. Jesus had been welcomed with open arms by many people as he proclaimed the good news of God's kingdom. Up to that point, Jesus' first invitation to discipleship had led to successes that were beyond the world's wisdom. The sick had been healed. Unclean spirits had been driven out of people's lives. The kingdom of God had been proclaimed and revealed through the preaching and teaching of Jesus. New life had been given to the dead. The hungry had been fed. Jesus walked on water. But there were religious leaders who did not appreciate the nets Jesus was casting for God's kingdom. In fact, they had grown to despise Jesus. As Jesus assessed the current reality of his ministry, he knew that the past and present successes of his first invitation to discipleship were not going to reveal the full extent of God's kingdom. Reading the handwriting on the wall, or perhaps it would be better to say reading the handwriting on the cross, Jesus issued a second invitation to discipleship. If anyone want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. In considering Jesus' second invitation, it's important to realize both Jesus' first invitation and the second invitation contain the same word: follow. Follow. It's also essential to note that while the essence of Jesus' call to discipleship remained the same, the reality of following Jesus changed dramatically as Jesus invited the disciples to embrace the chaos of the cross. It is one thing to be fishers of people. It is quite another to deny oneself and take up your cross. In a few moments, Kathy and Mark will share a leadership application for faithful encouraging that we have developed. But first, I want to share with you about a personal application of a biblical principle that is required for faithful encouraging. The personal application for faithful encouraging is found in Jesus' second invitation to discipleship. It is the biblical principle of beyond and within. Beyond and within. This invitation to discipleship teaches that true discipleship must be beyond self-focused concerns as Jesus take up their cross and live beyond the comfort of their expectations. Faithful acceptance of this invitation results in transformation through making intentional choices that will reflect the vision and the values of life that were taught by Jesus. A few years ago, I learned about a church that embraced this principle of beyond and within. I was so impressed, and am still impressed today. This church was going through a very, very difficult period. Interestingly, most of their problems were from outside influences. But the tensions and the anxieties within the church were raging. What are we going to do? How are we going to get out of this? In response, a small group of faithful leaders made a decision. And in essence, they said, we refuse to focus on the things that we can't change. We're just not going to do it because we can't change them. Instead, they put together a comprehensive mission plan, and it included mission trips to the Gulf Coast after Hurricane Katrina. This refocus beyond their own concerns influenced others in the congregation to join in. People who had never been involved in mission were now going to the Gulf Coast together as a team of Christian followers of Jesus. It was a turning point for that congregation. Looking beyond the turmoil, they laid the foundation for future growth in ministry as the congregation came together for the cause of Christ. Beyond and Within is a scriptural foundation for sharing the love of God through an outward focus. Churches that apply this biblical teaching assess the current reality of their ministry by how they are nurturing people to be disciples of Jesus, who see beyond their self-focused concerns. Remembering Jesus' second invitation to discipleship, they share the love of God by focusing beyond their own concern. Through this same self-giving vision, they also look within at those things that are hindering them from living as God's called people. Churches that reverse the principle of beyond and within to within and beyond focus on maintaining cherished memories of the past or perhaps cherished ministries of the present. Their language protects past and present perceptions as their focus for ministry becomes more inwardly focused and oftentimes on survival. They have forgotten Jesus' admonition that those who want to save their life will lose it. Their inward focus overcomes their outward focus. Churches that live by the principle of beyond and within measure their faithfulness by the ways that they are in ministry beyond themselves. They understand that the journey of discipleship is always a journey beyond the past and the present reality of the church's life. They faithfully remember Jesus' admonition that those who seek to lose their lives for my sake and for the gospel will save it. Their balance of outward focus and inward need moves them beyond maintaining the present comfort level of their ministry. I too want to thank you for participating in the surveys that we did. We're going to look at another one this morning, and this shows that just over half of our churches reach out to the needs of the community. The remainder can benefit from embracing chaos for transformation.
Well, just let me share with you a few minutes about chaos. One of the churches I served, we had a bit of a chaotic situation, was that we had skateboarders out in our parking lot. And we had a meeting of our leadership and said, what are we going to do? You know, it's risky. We were at risk with our insurance. And so as we met, we talked about a half an hour or so. Then there was one wise man, and the group says, well, why don't we just talk to the skateboarders? It was a novel concept. So what we agreed to do was that if church staff was there, that we would go out and invite the skateboarders to come in to have a soft drink of refreshments in the church. And then we would talk with them and say, we really do respect you, but we just can't have you here doing this at this time because of where we find ourselves. So we did that, and there was one skateboarder in particular who came in. It was a group of boys, and we were sitting there, and they had a Coke, and I was talking with them, and they said, you know, most people just yell at us and tell us to leave. Then we talked a little bit more, and he says, now, what building is this? What type of building is this? So this is a church. And he began to talk a little bit about church, and it changed the whole dynamic of relationship. There's another church on the Richmond district. Are you going to tell the story? There's another church on the Richmond district when I served as a DS that had the same challenge of skateboarders. They took it a step beyond where we had. We established a relationship. They took it a step beyond, which I wish I could say that we had done this, but I'll give credit where it's due. At this church, where they went beyond it was they actually started a ministry with the skateboarders. And they developed a skateboarding ministry for their church where they reached out with these young people, and they actually take them to skateboarding parks. They go on field trips. They transformed that whole situation beyond where they found themselves. I would like to say they embraced the chaos. Well, the biblical word chaos does indeed describe the transformational journey of faithful encouraging. Chaos is the reality of unformed creative possibility. The beginning verses of the Bible introduce two realities of faith: the reality of God and the reality of chaos. Listen to how these two realities are described in Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind of God swept over the face of the water. The face of the deep water over which God's Spirit was moving literally means deep, or the abyss. It means chaos. From the biblical reality of God's Spirit moving over the face of chaos, over the face of chaotic water, the story of creation is told as God begins speaking order to the creative possibility that is present. Let there be light. And there was light. Looking beyond the darkness, embracing the reality of chaos, God was able to embrace the creative possibility that was present as each day of the week related to the other, until eventually God created a future that was different from the past and created Sabbath, the relationship to which God invites us to live, a relationship with God. The question is how do we respond to chaos? Kathy's going to share some thoughts.
Yeah, so how do we respond to chaos? We usually do one of four things. We either try to avoid it, we try to control it and lock it down, right? We try to destroy it, make it go away, or we embrace it. It's usually one of those four ways that we respond and react to chaos. Because chaos is permanent, it's important for Christian transformational leaders to learn how to embrace it and how to see the creative possibilities in chaos. There's a notion that you guys may be familiar with called permanent whitewater. Have you heard of that? It basically uses an analogy. She's standing over there. I thought she was waving her white thing, which would have been so cool. That's a new trick we're going to have to use.
Yes.
There's a notion called permanent whitewater, and it basically says that in a lot of our leadership training, what we've learned to do, in this analogy of we're in the raft and we're floating down the river and we come upon white water, what we've learned to do is hang on till you get through the white water and things are calm again. And then you can get back to work, right? Wouldn't it be nice if that's the way it worked? But the issue with that is if that's how you approach chaos, then what happens is you become the best hanger-oner, right? Because that's the skill you develop. And so we find ourselves just holding on, waiting for that day when things are going to be calm again and we can get back to work. Well, this notion is, ladies and gentlemen, the white water is permanent. In this world we live in, there's no calm water necessarily on the other side of our leadership lives. And so we have to change the skill that we have. We have to move from being the people who try to just get through it to being the leaders who can be completely effective in the midst of permanent white water. I remember when I first heard that concept, I was young in my leadership career, and I was depressed by it. I was not pleased, that I don't know if I wanted to accept that or not, that really our world gives us that condition that we have to lead through. But we would probably all say today that that is the truth, that is the case, that the white water's permanent and we have to learn how to navigate it. Well, let's see. Our little survey we did, we asked this question. When your church encounters chaotic situations, what's its history been? Has its history been to avoid, which 30% of you said our church tries to avoid chaos. Control, 38% said we try to control chaos. Destroy, 7%. And embrace, 25%. It's interesting that a full 75% try to make it go away. So we really do have to take some time to think about how we can embrace chaos for that creative possibility. Like Mark talked about, God certainly did in the beginning. In her book, Leadership and the New Science, Margaret Wheatley actually tells us that chaos has value. And the value is, she says, chaos is a necessary force that creates order. That it's actually necessary to get you to a new order and outcome. So what I want to do now is talk through two concepts, and I want to put them together to talk about the life cycle of an organization, the two concepts that we've talked about this morning. And the first one is chaos, as we've just been talking about. Go ahead and give me the chaos there. There you go. A little chaotic. So the first order is chaos. And we've said that chaos can either be non-ordered, very chaotic, not moving in any direction, or it can be ordered, right? Those are the two ends of that spectrum. It can't be destroyed or controlled or those kinds of things, but it can be ordered, as Genesis tells us. Well, the other axis that we're going to add to that is what John talked about this morning, and that is, where's your focus? Non-ordered or ordered? Where's your focus? Is your focus beyond self, beyond the walls of your organization, or is your focus within? Are you self-focused, or is your organization kind of focused within the walls? And when you put these two notions together, you get this interesting life cycle of an organization. And the way I use this in some of the work I do with nonprofits is to help these organizations understand kind of what's wrong. And so I want to talk you through that a little bit. Let's begin in the top left quadrant. And that's where a lot of nonprofits begin. By the way, when I'm finished talking through a nonprofit example, Mark's going to talk through a church example, so you can kind of see both of those and how they relate to each other. But in the top left quadrant, that's kind of how nonprofits begin. We have folks who have a huge heart for an issue or a group of people or a cause, and they're so completely focused beyond themselves. They say, something's got to be done about this. And so they step into this very chaotic world relative to that issue or cause, and they say, we're going to do something about this. And they start working, right? We all know folks who have done that. Many people in this room have done that and do that on a regular basis. And they start working, and they start making a difference to that cause or those people or that issue. And they start moving then to the right side of this matrix. The chaos starts to order up a little bit. They start getting some results, right? Their actions kind of get in line. It starts making a difference. And we call that aligning. That's when your organization is really aligning itself. And this is exactly where you want to be. It's where those nonprofits want to be. We want to keep our focus beyond ourselves, and we want to keep that chaos ordered. Keep moving in that direction of getting something done. That's where we want to be, and that's an interesting balance that we're always trying to strike. Well, then a really funny thing starts to happen to these nonprofit organizations. An organization forms up around this effort, right? And things start needing to be done. Things like, we got to hire some people. We got to find a building. We got to write some grants. We got to do some paperwork. We got to turn in some reports. All those very important things. But what do they do sometimes to us when our focus is beyond self and beyond organization, but then we get all these requirements? What starts to happen? You start to focus within. That's right. You're focused, and you don't know you're doing it, right? These wonderful organizations that I work with, they couldn't look back and say a moment when that happened, and they certainly didn't do it on purpose. But over time, it's like these things start trying to take over your share of mind, and you start focusing within. So you move, kind of start creeping down to the bottom of that matrix. You start focusing within more than beyond. We call that kind of forgetting. It's not an intentional forgetting, but you start kind of forgetting why we were here. Your organization kind of forgets what they were here to do. Many times at this point, something happens that we see, and that is the organization kind of starts trying to protect itself, its own existence, rather than that focus on what we initially started out to do. Well, then what do you think happens? Things start getting chaotic again, right? Because we don't have that great focus that we had, and our actions may become a little unaligned. We may get distracted by other things that need to be done, and so we move to the other side and we kind of start wandering. And with the company that I have that works with nonprofits, that's when we usually get involved with nonprofit organizations when they say kind of, we're lost. We don't know what this is all about anymore. It's too hard. We don't feel like we're making the impact we used to make. What happened? And we like to use this model to help them understand it's a natural force. You know, chaos is a natural force. It is in nature. And leadership is what keeps us on the ordered side and keeps our focus beyond self and beyond organization. So I hope that's helpful for you to kind of see how these two things work together. And Mark's going to give us some church examples of that.
Sound familiar? One of the realities to understand from the Bible in Genesis is that God did not destroy chaos. God ordered chaos. So chaos is a part of what led to Sabbath. If we desire to live in relationship with God, chaos is going to be a part of it at times. The question is how do we approach it? What we are suggesting is that of the four options, avoid, control, destroy, and embrace, the correct one is embrace, and the other three will wind up, rather than you speaking order to chaos, chaos speaking disorder to you. As a district superintendent, as a pastor, as a director of connectional ministries, as a person working with churches, what I have found is that many churches find themselves, as Kathy talks about, when they are in a chaotic situation, being in that order of wandering. And as I come in and work with them, particularly as a pastor when I would go with churches, turnaround situations, my first response was always to help them to faithfully remember, lay the foundation, and then to faithfully equip, and then to faithfully encourage forward. And that's in that upper left quadrant. If you want to put an RE in form of forming, you get reforming. Many times churches find themselves in that situation. Kathy and I have a little discussion on this. She likes the word balance in that upper right quadrant. I find sometimes there's a tension between beyond and focusing beyond and order and chaos there. And I find the tension is because sometimes you get people who say, we really need to order ourselves to maintain ourselves. And there are some people who say, we really need to order ourselves to focus beyond ourselves. And that provides creative possibility that needs to be embraced. That is particularly where the true test of leadership comes, is in that upper right quadrant of alignment, particularly within the life of a church. Because our tendency is, if you've heard the word apostolic and pastoral, if you think about beyond, you can think about apostolic. If you think about, this moving on this other one, it might be pastoral. And we talk about apostolic church and pastoral church. Apostolic models, pastoral models. Pastoral models tend at times to focus on the shepherd tending the needs of the sheep, the flock. Apostolic tends to emphasize the shepherd going out and searching for the lost sheep. Remember the 99 and the 1? How do you approach that? Well, in working with churches, also just want to say that in the forgetting part of it, that's a lot of times, remember when Kathy did her chart yesterday? That's really where you need to implement that chart if you're in a church setting. Because where many churches find themselves is that the natural tendency is to come back, being weighted down by the needs of the organization, and you find yourself being weighted to the point where you wind up forgetting, and your tasks are being performed, but you're forgetting the reason why you're performing them. You need to go back to your mission. And then, of course, the opposite of aligning is indeed wandering. Remember the story of the people of Israel? You remember that story? They sent 12 spies into the promised land. They come back with a report. 10 of them said they were all in consensus about the report. There are giants. And this land is flowing with milk and honey. They were in agreement on the report. But as they brought back the report, you had 10 who said, we seem to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seem to them. They have forgotten the promise. You had 2, Joshua and Caleb, and said, the Lord's with us. Been with us in the past, will be with us in the future. And a part of what happened was, you remember who the congregation of Israel believed? It was the 10, right? You remember what happened? They got to wander. Now, the wandering was the time eventually that God used for faithful remembering. And what I want to share with you is that transformation, as you look at these quadrants, transformation doesn't have to occur only in that wandering phase. Transformation can occur in any of these particular quadrants. Do you remember the story we started off with yesterday was the story of the prodigal son and the older brother? Where the prodigal son sort of found himself in that wandering phase. I would say that the brother who stayed at home may have found himself sort of on the line between aligning and forgetting. Remember, the true test of transformation comes in situations where we find ourselves living in comfort. That's where the true test of transformation comes. As you look at this, what I invite you to think is that all areas of this involve chaos. All areas in this involve creative possibility for a movement of hope into a future that's different from the past. And we invite you to think about what that means about embracing chaos for yourself and for your church. Well, Christian transformational leaders understand this. They understand that transformation is the story of creation being told in the present tense. If you're wondering how you can tell the story of transformation from your church, just tell the story of creation. Of a God who was willing to embrace chaos, to create a future that is different from the past, and a God who invites us to live into the future that God has already created and that God has already redeemed through Jesus Christ. That's a good starting point for transformation. Well, the other thing I invite you to remember from this is that either transformational leaders will speak order to chaos, or what will happen is that chaos, non-ordered chaos, will begin to identify leadership. And that the needs, the internal needs of the organization will start defining the needs not only of the organization, but their expectations of the leader. Well, there are three disciplines that can help us, and we've been talking about the third one today. That's faithful encouraging. And what I invite you to remember is that as a transformational leader, the only person you have the power to change is yourself. As much as I would love to tell you what to do, or how to think, or to agree with me, that is not transformation. Transformation is not only a movement, it is an invitation. Because an organization cannot change unless they see it modeled within the leader. An organization cannot change unless a leader is willing to be vulnerable and to confess and to acknowledge, I don't know all the answers, but I'm on the journey with you. Christian transformational leaders practice that discipline. Think about it. Embracing the cross. That's not a real encouraging word. But it's the wisdom of God through Jesus Christ. It's the wisdom of God that we are invited to live in. Because it is as we embrace that cross that we will follow Jesus to Calvary and to the empty tomb. Well, three disciplines we have brought up before you. Faithful remembering, leaving the boats behind, faithful equipping, flowing with living water, faithful encouraging, helping persons to live and to embrace the cross, to embrace chaos as they become part of the story of the future that God has already created. As we end our time together today, it's important for us to remember that Jesus invites all of us, by following him, to be leaders in a movement of hope. Whether you are a transformational leader, or a first follower, you are a leader in a movement of hope through Jesus Christ. That's the good news of the gospel. Well, Kathy, John, and I are so grateful to you for this sacred privilege of sharing some thoughts about what it means to lead by following Jesus. We want to thank again Bishop Kammerer for the privilege. I can't tell you how humbling it is. And thank you for receiving us well. You know, sometimes when you're talking to people who know you, you wonder how it's going to go.
Yes, you do.
We want to thank you for so graciously receiving us in the grace of Christ. And as we conclude our time, please allow us together to faithfully encourage you to lead by following Jesus. God's grace and peace.
Thank
Amen.
you.